Hello, and welcome to Metachemistry. This is episode 126, and we're joined by a special guest today, Cutter, who you might recognize as the runner up in the Corvus Belli Krug this year in 2025, and the success that he had with his vanilla PanO. And so he's joined us here today to talk about tournament prep, and specifically in ways that I think are really interesting and are not necessarily um, the most common ways one might prepare. Is very data driven, and I think that's really interesting to kind of dive into the nitty gritty of how that how that came about. And so that's what Cutter is here to talk about today. So thanks for being on the show. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we get started, we do, of course, want to give a quick shout to Mo Games. Mo Games is the sponsor of Metachemistry, and you can get all of your Infinity miniatures there at Mythic's Online Emporium, which you can find at mo-games.com. And if you are a paid patron of any level, then you get a 10% discount code to that store. And even if you're not a patron, if you just join our free online community via Discord, you just hit the Mo giveaways roll. You need a US shipping address for Mo to send to, and you're automatically entered into a raffle every month for a $40 coupon code. Because what's better than games? Mo Games. And so, as I said, I am joined today by Ian and Cutter. And Cutter, for those who aren't familiar, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and kind of talk about your background, both professionally and in Infinity and other gaming endeavors, if you'd like?
Certainly. Ahoy, everyone. I may have met some of you at various events. Whether it was Infinity or I played quite a bit of War Machine for the decade before that. And I started Infinity in Albuquerque, New Mexico with the meta here, which is fantastic. Last year, it was actually on Valentine's Day, I remember. And I went up to visit a tournament in Santa Fe before I owned any models to kind of check out what is this game like. Because I had spent about a year looking for a game when I realized that War Machine wasn't really going to be following me into the future. So yeah, I have played a variety of games throughout my life, and tabletop war games is definitely where I find that itch is really scratched. And I would say I'm a competitively oriented player, but I think the thing that's really cool about Infinity is that the casual and competitive metas are both they're they're both really friendly. It's a very
Mhm.
unique psychological, sociological state to be in, where you have all of this social trust and social contract, and just how the communities come together is really amazing. So I've tried to take that into mind going into these events too, and I'll talk a little bit more about that with the prep. But essentially, I started with Varuna back when Varuna was a thing because it had a cutter in it, and my name's Cutter. My last name's Cutter, and so I decided, well, I have to learn how to play that because that would be, an oversight to not be able to play the model that has the same name. And
Exactly. And people are going to ask if you didn't, right?
yeah, yeah, and there's some jokes because I'm playing vanilla PanO at this event, and about whether or not I bring a cutter, and I do try to generally build lists with a cutter and a pairing, and also give the illusion of a cutter. So having
Hmm.
enough hidden stuff and hidden information that maybe there is a cutter somewhere, and you're standing across from this person who has cutter on their name tag, and they're playing vanilla piano. So yeah, there's definitely a psychological element to that I find fun, and it's one of the
For
things
sure.
that's unique about Infinity that I like too. But yeah, I started with Varuna. I went to HB. That's what I played last year at Krug was Assassins.
Hmm.
And um, when when N5 came out, I dabbled in Kestrel and Vanilla PanO and Assassins and looked at some other things and ended up settling on Vanilla PanO. But I can go into the specifics of that later. But essentially, I love the game. I love analyzing the game. I love talking about the game, and I'm very happy to be here and sharing this with everyone. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're really happy to have you. I think that we talked a little bit at the Krug, kind of in passing, because it's hard 'cause trying to get around to so many people. It was such a big event this year. It was kind of crazy. A lot of fun, but I feel like I didn't even get to
Yeah,
say hi to everyone I would
lots of
have wanted to.
people.
Hmm.
Or if I did, I said hi and never saw him again.
Right. Um, so yeah. So I got to see a little bit, and I think it's really interesting. Like, I think we were in particular talking about the mission breakdown uh, that you had built. Uh, I thought that was really cool, even though I feel like at least a fair bit of it was over my head, at least in our brief exposure to that. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's a really cool lens to view through.
yeah. It's so I yeah. I'll talk about it in a little bit here, but yeah, I think Infinity lends itself very well to data analysis, and I'm excited to see what CB does with the sphere also to see how much
Hmm.
if they're getting more data, if they're using more data, and how they're going to use that. So that'll be exciting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested to see how much Army might change once it's pulled into Corb Sphere.
Hmm.
Because I mean, I really like Army as is, and it hasn't really changed that much over the years, and it's been a pretty solid app. So I wonder if maybe it'll be a fairly direct port. Maybe not. I don't know, but I'm excited to see how things turn out, and if they do add more tools, especially things that kind of help with onboarding. Like, I know that they started doing things like they added the search feature, which is of varying amounts of usefulness depending on the terms, and adding the unit images and things like that. So if there are more tools like that that kind of increase accessibility, I think that would be really great. So time will tell. So why don't we start off with how you looked at the Krug, and we can kind of use that as our jumping off point. And what were these data points that you were looking at, and what conclusions were you drawing that informed your choices?
Sure. Yeah. So I have a psychology background and some hard sciences, including data science stuff, and so that's often the lens that I will look towards when I'm approaching events like this. It's a lot of it's also intuitive, but I find that sometimes when you're really agonizing over decisions, that
Hmm.
data can make that really clear sometimes. And so
Sure.
my goals going into Krug last year, and I carried them over to this year, were in order, ensure the opponent has a good time. Number two, approach games as a social learning experience, which I think Infinity does really well.
Hmm.
Three, play the best game I'm able to play. And four, perform well enough that I feel good about the outcome. And this year I got
Hmm.
super lucky. So the fourth one was kind of an easy win. Um, but I think that framework in general ends up working very well, and I think that a lot of the community follows something similar. So that's kind of the groundwork and how I try to frame the experience. And looking at the particular event, I know we talked about it a little bit beforehand, but essentially one of the big things that I needed to figure out going into the Krug was what am I going to play? Because I had been playing Assassins at the end of N4, and I started the game playing Varuna, and I had looked at a lot of options going into N5. I did turret spam because I'm a bad person, and I was ostensibly preparing my meta for some of the events they were going to that I couldn't make.
Sure.
And then they didn't see as many turrets as I was throwing at them. And I tried Assassins with the new IR, which is amazing. And
Mhm.
I played around with vanilla PanO and looked at some other options. And ultimately, I had switched over to vanilla PanO shortly before the turret change happened, because I was interested to see, I really liked the power of that mechanic, and I wanted to
Mhm.
see it through to see, is it competitively viable? And vanilla PanO was the only other place where you could try it. And then I fell in love with Joan because Joan is amazing. So I,
For
you
sure.
know, I started leaning into that, because vanilla PanO just kind of sung to me. Everyone's probably had this experience with a faction, but I love list building, and I found my muse in Jean d'Arc. So, and you mustn't shun one's muse when you're in need of their guidance. So I followed that, and
That's right.
also, some notes on the human condition there. So uh, our whole meta, I think a lot of metas do this, where we're practicing for the events that are coming up. We're looking at the missions that are coming up, and as you inevitably accumulate more and more factions as an Infinity player, I think you get the ability to start looking at missions and say like, okay, what do I want to play, and what looks good in this context? And vanilla PanO just kept working, and then once we got word about provisioning being the replacement for supplies, I felt like I was already pretty locked in at that point, and I
Mhm.
was struggling quite a bit with some of the final decisions on how I was going to approach that. So one thing, as a slight addition slash aside, is the data analysis part of this. So one of the things that was helping me make these decisions is I essentially created an evaluation tool that looks at, a couple dozen different variables, that in some way encapsulate what I think are meaningful parts of how you play the game, offensively, defensively, utility, um, and breaking those into different components and then combining them in interesting ways. And one of the things that you can get out of that is basically like a heat map that you can see like how the different missions look when you're looking at, how important is it in this mission to bring a lot of specialists? How important in this mission is it to just kill everything? How important is zone control? How important is resilience? How important is the ability to move across the table efficiently? How important is it to have the element of surprise in some context? So, like having an infiltrating specialist. And so, part of the analysis for that was basically running that through, for any data nerds out there. So, principal component analysis, which essentially clusters things together. And I was building this tool with a subset that included the Krug missions. And one of the things that was really interesting that came out of that is it showed that all of the missions were clustered for the Krug except Firefight, which
Mhm.
was way
Yep.
off to the side on its own. And I think that was probably the general experience for a lot of people, was that they brought a list that was a little bit more dedicated towards Firefight. And then the for me, the other one that kind of stuck with that was Supremacy. And Supremacy was also not as closely clustered as the other three, being Provisioning, Unmasking, and Bpong. And so you can kind of see how that might come about. But sometimes it's interesting when independent of, I made this whole thing up, so it wasn't totally independent, but the fact that it showed that gave me some perspective on how I might approach that. Another data analysis thing that helped me tremendously is building, and we've seen different versions of this throughout the community, but essentially what profiles can do what classifieds, and then
Sure. Yep.
I kind of built that into its own spreadsheet that showed me what are the gaps in my list. And then I don't like to have lists that can't do like a pairing that can't do certain things. So
Mhm.
having a heat map on that too to see like, okay, I might be so if I'm looking at it, the the cutter list is pretty shallow on some of the doctor, paramedic, engineer, and it was actually a bit weak on some of the spotlight and hacker classifieds. But I knew
Gotcha.
that I was dedicating that list towards firefight and probably supremacy, and not and explicitly not bringing it into provisioning, probably not unmasking and VPONG. So that was okay. I could accept that risk because I knew what it was prepared for, and I had played it in a lot of different tables. So I felt comfortable bringing it into a lot of different matchups and a lot of different tables. So that was one of the things that also helped me structure how the pairing came together. Was looking how do you make those difficult decisions, and sometimes data helps with that quite a bit. So
Sure. Makes sense. And actually, one thing on the missions themselves, where you said you generate this heat map based on essentially core principles of the mission, um, how did you weight those by mission? Like, as far as where everything lines up on this map, um, was there any sort of objective scaling that you can use, or is this just kind of a gut feeling for this mission? Okay, firefight is a very aggressive mission that does have some classifieds, and so I'm going to notch up these categories a little bit. It's like, what's the process look like there?
yeah, so there so I did look at the correlation matrix to try to get some independence of variables, and uh, the the different these different kind of qualities of the mission were scored based on my impression, and then I also
Mhm.
uh, used some data science techniques, and I also fed it into some AI platforms where I basically trained it to understand what I was doing, and then tried to get it to give me a score, and then I could compile all of those techniques into something that would be kind of a weighted average of all of those things together, and then that helped
Gotcha.
me refine the evaluation tool as I went along. So
Very cool.
and that all of those together is also what fed into that principal component analysis of seeing like what missions are kind of like each other in important ways. And so the actual heat map of the different missions, um, it it was a work in progress. It's definitely something I'm still working on, and
Especially
I
now.
would say, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, right now I am still digesting ITS 17, and I haven't even started building that into the model yet. But
I feel that.
yeah, it was largely gut feeling, but it was also based on things like, how many classifieds are there at the time? Were there specialist bonuses? Were there incentives for specialists? Were there disincentives for bringing specialists? Was it really important to hit the ground running, or did you really need to hold on for the long run if it was all end of game scoring? How the scoring happened, where the scoring happened, the types of things that would be advantageous in that context. And this was all built on the RGR mission set, which had armories. So that
Mm-hmm.
was a little bit easier to anchor it on. And then it was adapted to the Krug with more open tables. So yeah, it was based on a lot of the kind of hard mission components that were just coded into how the missions function, and then kind of my experience with those things, which is granted is limited, but it ended up playing out fairly well in terms of scoring the most points that I could throughout the event.
Yeah, and I believe you had the highest objective point scoring throughout the event. Is that right?
Somehow, it worked out. I started the whole event with the I saw Joel from California on the Krug Discord, basically taunting people to challenge him for a keychain, the Joan keychain. And I was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'll bite, I'll bite. You know, here's
Yeah.
someone, they're being really friendly, and they're offering these cool keychains, and my army case is an actual like steel toolbox. So I was like, oh, that'll
Hmm.
be great. I can clip it right on the front. It'll look cool. Everyone loves their
Yeah.
nerd bling. So I challenged him,
Hmm.
and I had no idea who he was. And I was talking to my locals, and they're like, yeah, so Joe is really good, and he's playing Corregidor, and I don't know if I've
Yep.
ever played Corregidor, and I know about the bandit nonsense. So I was like, this is
Yeah.
terrifying. And then I lost the initiative roll and had to go first on Pong. And that was a very hard game. So kudos to them. But I was 4-4. I got a 4-4 tie in that game, and I kind of just wrote off any type of top finish at that point because I knew how intense the scoring was going to be because we only had 5 rounds to get through like 116-ish players.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think that was the final count.
that relieved a lot of stress and set
Fair.
me up for a near perfect submarining. So if the final game, so if Derek had tied and they scored like 4-3, I think was their game. So if he had scored one less point or his opponent scored one more, I actually
Hmm.
would have won the event, which would have been the
Yeah.
ultimate submarine.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was wildly close.
Uh-huh.
For those of you who listened to our previous episode with Azoka and Chainsaw, we talk about just that. So,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So the fact that the finals tied was really surprising, and
mhm.
I know that CB's taken measures now to make sure that ties are pretty damn difficult. So,
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, it was interesting. I kind of follow the philosophy and list design of like hope for the good thing, prepare for the bad thing,
Hmm.
and uh, that got me through some pretty difficult situations throughout. So going first against Corregidor on Bpong against a very skilled player was definitely in the bad things list. And
Right.
uh, I was, I'm running Joan, so that was the list without the cutter. And I had a lot of hackable stuff, and I did not want repeaters on my deployment line. So I
No
deployed
kidding.
way back, and he didn't even bring those. But I kind of hurt myself a little bit to avoid the worst outcome, and that did damage my ability to kind of approach the game as aggressively as I would have liked.
Sure.
So
Now,
so
I
that
will
was
say he
interesting.
definitely had them. It must have been his other list, but I know I saw
Maybe,
another
yeah.
game when I was making the rounds that he definitely had him in the other list. So
Yeah,
gross.
yeah, I was scared of them. I mean, I guess it's probably better if he's going first to be able to run them
Sure.
like that. And I didn't get the opportunity to talk to him about how the game went, but it was definitely a very difficult game.
Yeah, for sure. And just for context, are we talking mobility Joan or heavy armor Joan? And they're
Always
both heavy
mobility
infantry.
Joan. Yeah,
Gotcha.
it's
I had a feeling,
I
but
yeah, I can't run anything other than version 2. I've actually never run version 1, but I have
Hmm.
at least 50 games with version 2. So yeah, it's the mobility Joan, even though she has frenzy, vanilla PanO has the ability to bring so many guns that you usually don't have to bring her out for a little bit, so she can kind of just hang out and get her armor bonuses and her, uh, the full cover bonus until she goes out and
sure.
starts murdering everyone. So mobility Joan, one of the things that probably annoys my locals, but I found fun in my prep for Krug was showing Joan's path through the table across different turns and different colors, where she runs up into the middle, shoots a bunch of things, retreats, the next turn runs halfway around the table, and then the third turn does the full lap through their deployment zone and like flanks their army behind them. Uh, so mobility Joan is a lot of fun, and I I do see the value of the other Joan, but I'm definitely stuck on the mobility Joan because when you really need things to happen, she can make them happen. She'll force some kind of conclusion to whatever's going on. And I got her into NWI in 4 out of my 5 games, so I was definitely
Wow.
playing with fire a bit.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, that is one thing that I feel like is a little worrisome, like losing the couple points of armor
hmm Yep. Yeah. Yeah. In that
when
game.
you can't fully benefit from cover.
Yeah. Yeah. It's scary. NWI helps tremendously.
Sure.
And I had in game 4, I was playing against US Ariadna, which is always scary when you meet someone at that point in an event with like an underdog faction. And I've never played against US Ariadna, at least in
Hmm.
N5. I think I may have played against them once or twice in N4. And yeah, it's
Lots of AP
scary.
and lots of T2.
Yeah, it's scary. Yeah, so I had Joan running up along the top of like some catwalk doing her nonsense, and she took a fight against is it I think it's Wild Bill who has the contender, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
he crit her. Like
Oh no.
he crit her with a T2, and I was like, "Oh shit,
Right.
this is bad." And I failed one save, and she went prone and stayed there for the rest of the game. But fortunately, I had a cutter too, so the cutter did the rest of the work while Joan uh, hid and tried desperately to not die to whatever was going on.
Yeah, that is rough. I mean, cutters are tricky at the best of times, but for
Mhm.
for US Ariadne, that feels really rough. I mean, I guess they
Yeah,
have a fair
yeah,
amount of MSV1, but like it's still a cutter.
it
They
was rough.
also have a fair amount of AP in close combat
hmm
at decent
Yeah,
fizz.
Yeah, as long as you can
yes.
get there. But the cutter never wants to advance, right? Like
Yeah.
it's an artillery piece.
So it turns out the cutter actually held one of their zones for turns 2 and 3 because I was in the supremacy. So it did advance, but that was in part because Joan couldn't really participate. And that game had
In the
my
mission.
yeah, hmm that game had my favorite oh shit moment, which was I had brought the cutter up early. Um, One of the things that I think is kind of fun to do with the cutter and other similar models is I'm running a bolt sniper in that list. I'm running a bolt sniper in both lists, but in that list, he had put up one of the HRL defensive pieces. And I know that what people do a lot of the time, if they can, they'll pin a sniper down. And so I put my sniper, I had held it in reserve, I put it down um, in a place where I thought there was a really good line where another defensive piece could show up and pin the sniper down. And then the plan was, okay, I'm just going to bring the cutter out early and I'll kill one of them, and then the sniper can take a good fight on the other one. And that worked out pretty well. He did drop another HRL. The cutter came out. It walked all the way into his deployment zone, and on the way, it's shooting across the table and some dogs and stuff, and we exchanged shots throughout that whole game as I kept walking back and forth. But so I cleared one of the HRLs, and I was like, okay, sniper, here's your moment. And takes a good fight onto the other HRL, gets crit, dies.
Oh,
And that
yep.
happened, I think, in every single game. My sniper died immediately on first
Oh,
contact,
no.
and I brought it up in one game, but it couldn't get anything done, and Joan had to do it anyway. But so it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, that was a really good piece, and it just happened that it did not work out in pretty much any games in the Krug. So yeah, it was fun though. The oh shit moment was I brought the cutter up. It got tangled with a foxtrot who just would not die. I couldn't get rid of the thing, and I ended up just having to leave. And I was like, all right, fine, stay there. And it was Joan going around to shoot that when she got crit on the way over. So the cutter had to retreat, and I ran out of orders to put it back into camo, which is scary. But I had
Yeah.
put the QAZ creature, which doesn't exist anymore, in the building with it, where I thought the cutter was going to go and retreat, but I couldn't get it back into camo, unfortunately, which is scary. And Van Zant dropped off the board right behind it,
Oh,
and
no.
which is bad. And my flash pulse fortunately turned around. It was able to dodge, and then it crit him, and that was the end of Van Zant's run. I
Wow.
thought.
Yeah.
But then he dropped in another paratrooper the next round and brought Van Zant up and shot the cutter in the back with some kind of an AP rifle. And I think it took 2 wounds, but it never took another wound. So it got to hang out and do cutter stuff for the rest of the game. But that was very scary twice. It was a rolling fear of Van Zant coming in and killing the cutter because he was definitely
For
ready
sure.
to do it.
Yeah. So, as far as your evaluation of, we'll say, with the Krug in this instance, what were the things that you found most important as you were going in, and how did that affect your list building? I know you've talked about you're running Joan and a bolt sniper and a cutter, but like, how did you come to those conclusions?
Yeah, so one of the big things is I always like doing meta analysis, and I like doing I love the list pairing process and trying to balance that. And one of the big things that helped me a lot was figuring out how I'm going to split the list. And at RGR, the Real Grand Retribution, I just one listed it, and that was kind of just because I started on that path and just decided to go for it. And in this one, I wanted to be a little bit more deliberate, and I felt like the mission lineup really, especially because Firefight was there, which disincentivized bringing a lot of specialists. It meant that
Yep.
I had to do something else, and I had gone into the event deciding that I was going to run vanilla PanO, deciding that I was just going to run Joan in every list, and wanting to run a
Hmm.
cutter list. And that was kind of the foundation of it. Was okay, so I'm going to have a cutter. Joan's going to be in both lists. How can I make that work? And I had a lot of trouble figuring out provisioning because
Hmm.
provisioning is very difficult to go second on, and it's also very, very demanding on order efficiency. And
Sure.
I knew that that was something that one of the lists needed to handle. And shortly before the Krug, they released the new drummer profiles, and
Yeah.
one of them has two. Oh, they both have 2 specialists in them, which is incredible, and they're both forward observers, which is incredible for provisioning in particular.
For
So
sure. Made me buy a
that
second
helped a
box.
lot. Yeah, that helped a lot. That helped what I was trying to do tremendously
Mhm.
because I was looking at Swiss guards, I was looking at red eyes, I was looking at all kinds of different things. The red eye just couldn't do provisioning well enough,
Mhm.
so it was taking up a lot of breathing room in the list. And the so the drummer was like one of the key ads for me of something that even though the drum bot, I bring the multi heavy machine gun version,
Mhm.
and even though that died basically every game right away without accomplishing very much, similar to the bolt sniper, it didn't really matter. That was kind of a luxury, and the list was so tight on points that I also had to make a concession to cover the missions that I needed to in the way that I needed to, which was mostly preparing for worst case scenarios. That I couldn't bring an Evo bot either, which I was
Yeah.
torn about, and I really tried to make it work. But ultimately, it wasn't there to get the most out of the multi HMG as possible. Something I like playing with is probability. It's probably my math and physics background, but the the playing with probability of like, okay, here's something that is not a huge investment and is efficient and has the chance of doing something really great. I always like playing with tools like that. And for me, that's what the multi HMG drummer was. It
Yeah.
was something that would be very scary and they would probably have to deal with, and it could go on a rampage possibly. But the real important part of that particular profile was the fact that it had two forward observers that could come up. I didn't get to do any of the really cute forks at Krug, but I did practice that going into Krug, where you have
Sure.
like a heavy flamethrower and a multi HMG at different ranges, and you have to ask the opponent, "What do you want to do about this?" And that's
Yeah.
fun, but it was all an added bonus. What was really going on is they were going to do a lot of the specialist heavy elements of what the list needed to perform, how to kind of execute in those missions, and
Mhm.
especially in provisioning because uh, the middle one they can actually take both of the boxes in the same order, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Didn't
Yeah, it's
work out.
huge.
My opponent for that particular mission defended it well enough that I could not pull that kind of BS off. But it was something that I was looking for that opportunity to do. The Teutonic Knight with Spec Ops is another really good piece for that. The Banshee killer hacker being able to kind of just be whatever you need wherever you need it, and I held
Sure.
that off. That probably accumulated more points than any other piece in in the Krug, just because it was always filling in the gap that of okay, I need it to be over here and supremacy, and it's going to flip this switch and it's going to take this zone that has been cleared out by Joan and Co. Or in that case, the rogue helot that would not die. So some of those things were the really important elements, were the concessions on how can these things score me points? Because ultimately I knew that's what I needed to do going into the Krug was score as many points as possible in whatever way possible and to basically make whatever concessions necessary to make that work. And so that was one of the things that I think helped me out quite a bit
Mhm.
was you know designing the lists and making those changes. I brought multiple versions of the lists with me and talked about it with Ian and Sebastian, the people I wrote up with, and converged on it like right before the event started. So I was still agonizing over some of the small changes that were very specifically around the specialist choices. Um, in one, it was a paramedic versus a doctor. and in the other one it was whether I was bringing Joan with a specialist or with a blade specialist, or if I was going to separate the machinist for the cutter in that list and bring Joan with the 2 helots. And ultimately, it just made more sense for some of those missions to make sure that I was protecting Joan with the helots, and that
Yeah.
even though the doctor's better than a paramedic, I found that I often didn't have the orders to spend on a doctor. And so I ended up going with a bolt paramedic. And I think that even though the paramedic only killed my stuff, I think it was the correct choice
Sure,
given the
sure.
circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah, that last minute tinkering is just eminently relatable.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
feel like I'm never happy with a list.
Yeah, yeah, and getting really comfortable with how the list plays. I know we talk about that in a lot of different contexts, but
Mhm.
like Joan has helped me tremendously with learning how to use coordinated orders because you
Sure,
get
yeah.
one every turn. So just and it helps you scaffold thinking ahead too. And that was one of the reasons I chose PanO as my first faction. Was it focuses very heavy on fundamentals and making sure that you're picking good fights because you don't get to play with a lot of the asymmetry that other factions do. So
Mhm.
you really want to corral people into the conflicts that you want because that's where you have a statistical advantage in those contexts.
Sure, makes sense. And PanO's one of the best at making those sorts of, or engineering one of those such events.
Hmm. Yeah, and they do really well with defense, which is I'm tend to be more of a defensive player, even though I'm playing Joan and a cutter. And they're activated and able to do what they need to do because the list is very defensive leading up to
Mhm.
that. And even when so like in round 3 firefight, I was playing against one of our locals who is one of the people who basically trained me in how to play the game, Yanji. And playing against his
Sure, yeah.
Oban, I got second turn, which was devastating. But it was one of the tables that was very open. We called it it was like the little house on the prairie table. Um, and it was agonizing for him. He really wanted to go first, but he really, you know, he was like, I think this side is technically playable. Um, and he gave me the most devastating alpha that I received the entire event. That list
Yeah.
starts with 11 orders on the table, which is kind of nuts, and I lost 6 of them. So I had 5 orders. Well, the
Brutal.
cutter showed up, so I had 6 orders on the table when I started my turn, and I was pretty demoralized at that point. Um, and I had to jump. One of my favorite like technical moments was in that game. Because when you're behind, the way I play when I'm behind is you push your luck because I try to set my lists up that I can take big risks and maybe get big rewards if I'm behind. And if it doesn't
Mhm.
work out, you're already behind. If it does, it brings you
Right.
back in the game. So I like those mechanics. Joan's really good at that. Um, he had brought up a Shikami, um, I think is what it is. That's the heavy, right? The heavy infantry that jumps all
Yeah, the
over the
Mim
place.
6 super jump climbing +1,
Yeah,
yeah.
jumped up, was killing everything, killed the helots, um, killed both of my flash bots, killed like a bunch of stuff, and killed both of the bolts. Although the Shikami
Jeez.
didn't do all of that, but lost a lot, and
Yeah.
was standing on a building right above Joan and the cutter, and I was like, well, uh, I guess Joan's going up there to kill that thing because I can't do anything else. And so she jumped up. She took a rocket to the face from a Ryukin, and I think it crit her, and she only failed one save, fortunately.
Nice.
Got into melee with the Shikami, beat it, landed the crit, and the Shikami did not crit, and uh, he passed all of his saves. on sixes.
Yeah.
past all of them. So that was demoralizing. I had to go get a drink of water, and then come back and be like, okay, let's figure this out. I
Fair.
tried to jump my Pell bot up there. It died, predictably. And then I did something kind of crazy. I combat jumped in my Banshee behind the combat, kind of pinching the Shikami between it and Joan. And then I
Mhm.
coordinated the Banshee and Joan together into that melee
Mm.
combat and killed him. And
Nice.
that kind of turned the game for me. He did isolate the cutter. I got it back. It was a very hard fight, but it was mostly on the back of Joan being crazy, and then the cutter just refusing to fall in that combat. And Yanji does something very, I would say, very intelligent in a lot of the games that I've seen him playing from behind, where
Mhm.
he makes a really good call about what do I need to do, even if it's super risky, to give myself the chance to go and to continue in the game. In this case, he
Yeah.
had to attack the cutter with his lieutenant because if he won that, the cutter only had one wound left. Then he probably wins the game. If he doesn't, he's already behind. So being able to make those kinds of calls, I think, is something that I learned in part from him. And I think that taking those risks when they were necessary and kind of just getting away with it because I was very lucky in that event. And it's a lot about balancing the opportunity to capitalize on luck versus
Mhm.
mitigating bad luck. And so playing with those odds a lot, setting the list up to be able to do that, and then being able to hold leads and all of those mechanics coming together with a little luck kind of brought me through.
Very cool. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of tense moments for sure, and that can being able to just take a step back and say like, "Hold on, let me think about things for a minute."
Mhm. Yeah,
That's a big deal. Like that's
yeah, going out, leaving the room, getting a drink of water, coming back,
yep.
and being like, "All right, let's start throwing things into this combat with Joan and the Shikami and see what happens."
Yeah. It's really easy to throw good money after bad if you're making decisions while really agitated.
Mhm. Mhm. For sure.
All right. So, with the recent launch of ITS 17, we have the Seekers season. Things have changed quite a lot. Like we've seen some probably the most radical season over season change that I can remember in the last 15 seasons or so that I've seen.
Yeah, it's wild.
And so, how does that affect some of your preparation? So, I know, like you said, you had a number of data points that you used to kind of help inform some of your kind of gut decision making and experience. Um, is that something that you think will carry over into the new season? I mean, obviously, you'll have to build some of those around new missions, but is that kind of still the plan moving forward?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that the evaluation tool that I'm working on and will feed ITS 17 into as I get more familiar with it, it's really a reflective process for myself that also produce something. So it helps me analyze it and understand what I'm thinking, but also is producing something. And ostensibly, it will also be able to be used for tournament organizers to basically, pick a mission spread that they think is interesting in certain
Mhm.
dimensions of play. And so in addition to that, some of the things that are really important that have changed from my reading of it are things like losing border skirmish is huge,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like the value of parachutists has been reduced fairly dramatically. And between the different mission layouts and also just not having that ability anymore is a
Mhm.
big deal. The treasure hunter thing is huge, right? Like I don't know if you got experience with that in the game that you've played, but I love booty, and I'll go
Mhm.
on record stating that. And the the Sasha is amazing. It's a very good profile. I'm not saying that just because I play Joan, but also because I play Joan.
It
And
helps.
yeah, the treasure token thing is very interesting. It
Hmm.
being a specialist, the war core losing specialist, the stealth
Right.
ops going away for um, that I thought they were going to continue, but they just didn't. So some of those little extra rules are really impactful, along with things like the tactical support, because that's one of those cases where you don't want to count on it, but you don't want to not be able to capitalize on it. So I've had
For
games
sure.
where Joan got to be a specialist operative with sensor, and that's pretty amazing. So having the ability to kind of mix those together and get really great options is one of the things kind of leading into not even the actual missions themselves, but kind of the peripheral components that I think can
Mhm.
go into what can make a difference. You want to be able to capture lightning when it strikes, so have your bottle ready.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kinda interesting because there wasn't really I mean, a lot of times, especially lately, we've seen here is a benefit to a unit classification or a unit with a skill or what have you to kind of, sort of test tweaking units of that type, and
Hmm.
that didn't happen this season. And Treasure Hunters,
No.
I think, is pretty interesting. I didn't play Asacha in the game that I did play. I played a game of Critical Intervention, which is a really cool mission, but my opponent did, and then immediately pulled out a heavy machine gun and was like, "Take this, flashbots." I'm like, "Oh, oh no."
I like the treasure hunters thing though because it's a threat to Xenotech from was that season 11.
That
Um,
sounds right.
yeah, so it's the Xenotech but with a profile, and the treasure hunter thing is kind of operating in an adjacent territory to how the Xenotech stuff worked with dropping tokens down and then interacting with them based on some of the stuff in the mission for it. So, but I think this is a much improved version of that.
For sure. Yeah, it's not Whip 10, first off. That's great.
Yeah.
It's so sad when you were forced to have the Xenotech to get points in certain scenarios. You had to have the Xenotech pass rolls, and that was tricky when you're just flipping a coin every time. Eventually, it got better.
Yeah, on the note of whip, I do think that the like what you're saying about specialists not having specialist bonus in these missions, there's really only the one where hackers get to respond in ARO, right? When you're trying to press one of the buttons. Can't remember which mission that is. But the
Yeah, it's
the
with the
specialists.
special zones. I can't
Oh
remember what it's
yeah,
called.
yep. And so the ability to have that specialist bonus is a really big deal for some factions, and I know it also disadvantaged some factions. So I'm
Sure.
very interested to see how that impacts the packet, because I know that as PanO, that's one of the main things that I look at in list design is what are the bonuses? How can I get those bonuses into my list? And then how can I cover the whole event to the best of my ability? And that's just gone now. So it's a
Sure.
little stable over more orders, but less critical to have those specific things. So I think we're probably going to see a lot of specialists, and I suspect that people will be pushing for more orders because you're going to need some more orders on average.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. And it's something that I'm kind of torn on. I liked specialist bonuses because one, it's another facet to kind of structure your list around, and it's kind of like, okay, here's a synergy that you can take advantage of. But I totally understand, not every faction is as good at doing so. And so, considering like hackers were very common, because it makes sense. A lot of these specialist bonuses are more narrative driven than they are mechanically driven, I think. And so hackers
Mhm.
were the specialist bonus of choice for a lot of missions because of course they're logging into systems and downloading data and doing, all these sorts of things. But, obviously like Ariadna is going to suffer for that and not going to be able to take advantage nearly as well. Zone of
We
interest
like
is
the
that
reward
mission, by the way.
driver. It's fine.
I mean, yeah, that's true. You can participate, but it's not like, if I'm playing Tunguska or OSS and I have 3 or 4 hackers and, they're available in a fire team or they're up the field already.
Hmm.
It's a far cry. So it's the operational learning, which, for those that aren't familiar, basically, as long as you can spend consecutive orders on the same model interacting with the same objective, you gain bonuses to doing so. So if you fail the first time, you can then try again with a +3. And then if you fail the second time, you get a +3 and a special die, which is effectively what gets you back to the specialist bonus of prior seasons.
Hmm. Yeah, and that is incredibly useful. I
Hmm.
know that there was a lot of chatter about, especially after Krug, with how provisioning could be improved, and the general
Sure.
consensus, I think, was that first player's advantage in large part because it's so damn hard to get those boxes out of a safe zone once they're in. And
Sure.
I think this is a really elegant approach to solving that problem because now you don't just kill your opponent's specialist and then you're kind of done. And I think that they did a really good job in this packet of making every mission feel like a fight. They're all action films, they're all a
Right.
fight from turn 1 to the bottom of 3. And I know I played Hardlock. It felt very much like that, as like an improved capture and protect kind of thing. I watched someone play and Akil interference, and that was it came down to like the second to last order that swung the game over. In my game, I got my last thing done on the second to last order. I don't know if that was your experience in critical intervention, but it seems like from the packet
Yeah.
that these are all intended to not tie, and they're all intended to be live basically through the whole game.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more mutually exclusive scoring, which we've always had missions like that, but it feels like the majority of the packet is like that. And yeah, I think my game of critical intervention, yeah, it was pretty close. Like I was defending with my Tunguska against Vanilla Combined, and there was a Karantid in the room, and the only thing that I had at that point that could reasonably go fight it was my Kriza Borak with HMG, and I managed to see it in the objective room as I was moving up outside of Scepter range and got a solid volley off and managed to kill it in, I think, 2 orders. Then I could go into the room. But yeah, it was, what, probably 2 orders to go after I got into the room. And I didn't have anything to dominate the room besides that. And there was still a Caliban in there. So yeah, it was a little harrowing.
Yeah, I am excited by this. I haven't seen that many ITS seasons, but the response to this one has been very good, and it looks
Mhm.
hard, right? Like it looks
Yeah,
like a lot of hard missions, and that's exciting because if they were straightforward, that would be a lot less interesting.
for sure. And I like that the direct action missions are available if you want to generally ease back a little bit. I mean, I guess you could play a whole event that way, but I find that, like, unless it's geared at newer players, I don't think that that will be the case. But it'll be nice that you can have some points of relief in between the complexity of some of these missions.
Hmm. Yeah, and they improved res ops too, which I think could be
Yes.
an addition to some events.
Yeah, and being able to get eyes on what your opponent's doing other than, oh, someone has moved in contact with an objective. Are they just gaining cover, or are they trying to hold these? Is someone placing a beeper because they're getting points for that, or are they just trying to throw me off? Or, things like that, where you slowly get to learn this information, I think is great. I still think counterintelligence should flip an extra one in round one. I think that would be fun.
That would be interesting.
But yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty excited to see more of this season. And it is, just because it's so different, it is quite a bit harder to digest because it's not, we're not looking at 2 new missions or what have you. We're looking at essentially an entire packet of new missions, or half a packet, I guess, of new missions. But yeah, definitely looking forward to diving into that more. We were talking about it before the show, that I've read through it like once and change, and that is not nearly enough.
No, it's really not. I think that critical intervention and crossing lines are going to be meta warping in events, because
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
having to have 65 points for, not knowing if you're going first or second, and that changing whether you're attacker or defender in an asymmetric mission like critical intervention. And then crossing lines is just totally mind melting to try to figure out
Yeah.
what is even going to be going on in the middle of the board in these games. It's going to be nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested in to get some more games in, and I'm going to try and, part of me wants to play these missions like a few times in a row, but I can't. I'm going to have to be swapping around because I really want to get around to everything. Yeah, I think with that, we're just about ready to transition to final thoughts. But before we do so, I did want to say thank you to all of our supporters, those of you that listen to the show, our patrons who help take care of some of our costs, and just kind of let us keep doing this that we enjoy doing and getting more episodes out for you guys. So if you are able and willing to join that, you can find us at patreon.com/metachemistry. And so, as a show of our gratitude, we have a variety of benefits for you, such as final voting on polls. For instance, right now, Ian is looking to find his army for season 17. So I believe that poll will be going. So check that out at time of recording. And things like early access to episodes, some private channels on our otherwise free and open Discord, and things like that. And as far as our Discord itself goes, if you're looking for another place to talk Infinity, we'd love to have you there. There's always something going on. Cool tables, new models, good conversions. Like some people seem to think you can't convert metal models, but Mint Ninja will show you that you absolutely can. He's been doing some great stuff with his Starco.
Converting metal is awesome.
Right? You can do some cool stuff still, for sure.
Yeah, I've got a whole
it is
bunch of
definitely
neat ones
trickier.
myself.
Yeah, exactly. So there's always cool stuff going on. So if you're looking for more places to chat Infinity, or just want to say hi and know what's going on, feel free to join us. The Discord is in the show notes, as always. So with that said, Cutter, final thoughts on data-driven preparation for these events. Any final nuggets of wisdom that you have, or other things that our listeners might be able to use in their preparations?
Yeah, if anyone wants to chat about it, I'm definitely open. I love data. If you can give me any data for events or anything, I love to feed those in. For me, the data-driven process is really more about structuring some kind of a deliberate, reflective process for myself to help me tease out, the impact of dice, the flights of fancy where, I'm staying up super late coming up with weird ideas, and then I get to check them against some actual data the next day and see that, oh, this was really cool, or that was totally off base. You forgot to bring like half of the specialists you need for classifieds. So things like that can be it can be really helpful. You don't have to go through making a whole evaluation tool, but if you are trying to structure your learning and development in the game, so a lot of people will help you do that. And having some kind of a process to just reflect on those elements as you move along and move forward and make decisions, and then you can check them against other people. I think that can be extraordinarily helpful, and I love doing that. So happy to talk to anyone who has similar proclivities.
Awesome. And you can find Cutter on a number of Discords, really. I've seen you
Mhm.
active in a variety of places. On the unofficial Infinity Discord, here on the Metachemistry Discord, and I think you're on a handful of other
Yeah,
local regional Discords, right?
yeah, I have a lot. I have an extensive Discord collection. So yeah, you can find me. I'm Cutter on there. Sectator is the ITS name that I use, but that's just because I couldn't use Cutter because most gaming environments I can, but I had to translate it into Latin in this context. So the yeah, you can find me on a variety of different spaces. I'm always happy to chat.
Awesome. Well, Cutter, thank you again so much for joining us. We really appreciate the chat and having you. It's been really informative, and it's really fun to kind of have another lens to view these things. I think there's a lot of experience that players have that kind of hint in this direction, but having something to use to kind of bounce ideas off of and kind of confirm whether or not your head's in the right place. I guess the analogy that I was thinking of is it sounds like journaling with math.
hmm Yeah, it is. It is a lot like that, and yeah, I think it's. Um, Thank you for having me on. It means a lot to me. I'll give you a sentimentality warning. That I've been through some pretty rough stuff recently, and
Yeah.
my experiences with this community do mean a tremendous amount to me. And I love being here. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to contribute, and it's all kind of therapeutic in a way. It's part of the wellness of life. So
Hmm.
it's really great to be a part of this community, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to share some thoughts with the greater Infinity community.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been a great time, and I'm sure we'll have to do it again at some point. With that said, on behalf of Metachemistry, I've been Devin.
Ian.
And Cutter, and that's the meta.